Welcome, Tobias, Irina, Lisa, for joining us here on the panel and sharing with everybody our thoughts on sustainability investments. So maybe we start off introducing yourselves so that everybody gets a context who you are. So maybe, you like to start as a lady? Or we had a discussion first of all if ladies first is still appropriate or if it should. So why don't you start, Lisa?
Thank you, Paolo. Dr. Lisa Smith, I am the MD of Be Tomorrow Ventures, which is the brand new venture capital arm of British American Tobacco, BAT. And we have the Herculean but very interesting task of reinventing the corporate. So that is both a digital transformation process and building a new second core for the whole business in terms of where BAT is journeying to. So transformation is the name of the game for us. Thank you.
Irina?
Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. Can you hear me okay? Hope everyone is enjoying the conference. My name is Irina. I'm with ArcelorMittal, and I'm spearheading the climate investments for the steel industry, and also heading the XCarb Innovation Fund that we launched earlier this year. The objective is to identify potentially game-changing companies in order to transform our industry to carbon neutral steel making. So I think transformation is also the name of the game for us.
Thank you, Tobias.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. Tobias. I'm partner at Hitachi Ventures. It's the corporate venture arm of Hitachi Limited, and we invest in high growth, mainly deep tech software, B2B software startups that are of strategic relevance for Hitachi. And so that means we're kind of a strategic investor that fosters and inspires collaboration with our mothership and kind of while achieving venture-like returns. So we're set up as a kind of a classical fund. It's a Luxembourg-based fund, 150 million first fund. Just launched a second 150 million fund a couple of weeks ago that focuses on environmental tech and healthcare in specific. And kind of with our investments, we actually double down on, especially now in this new fund, on Hitachi's strategy to become a climate change innovator. This was kind of announced this morning by Alistair Dormer at COP26 that Hitachi not only becomes carbon neutral itself to be kind of a good lead, but also innovates for its customers to help to decarbonize our society. And kind of our initiatives kind of predominantly focus on technologies that kind of serve that purpose and kind of inspire and accelerate the business transformation.
Yeah, I think COP26 is a good keyword because I think it became evident. Excuse me. It became evident that we have. It's actually urgent to do something about the climate change and everything, and that also became evident that we don't have probably the technologies at hand right now to be efficient and to change the climate in an effective way. So we need to do more of these investment into startups in order to develop and helping to develop the technologies which we need in order to fight the climate successfully in 10 years or so, because it needs some time to develop these technologies. So what are your search fields? Where do you invest in when it comes to sustainability? What is interesting? Where do you put your money? Would you like to start?
Go.
Yeah, happy to do so. It's kind of our key interest. So we have 5 main pillars, and I'm focusing now on our environmental tech practice because Hitachi is broad, and we actually kind of invest from healthcare over IT and all sorts of businesses. But kind of in the environmental tech space, kind of we have 5 pillars. It's green energy and supporting the energy transition. It's circular economy. It's green finance, actually including carbon trading and kind of finance instruments to actually accelerate the energy transition or transition to carbon neutrality. It's sustainable supply chains, and it's I think that's That's the main, I would say. Obviously, carbon negative is the word of the game. Oh, and I forgot, biomanufacturing. Actually, we double down on biomanufacturing because biomanufacturing has a large carbon negative impact and will transform kind of a large part of our industry going forward.
Irina, how are you trying to make a difference?
Yeah, maybe let me give you some context. I think we all use steel. You know, steel is such a versatile material. It's actually infinitely recyclable, so as such, it's a very sustainable material. The challenge is that in the traditional route through blast furnace, for every ton of steel we produce, we emit around 2 tons of CO2. And globally, around 2 billion tons of steel is produced, so you can do the math. It's quite a significant CO2 emissions level, which translates into roughly 8% of the global steel emissions is actually coming from the steel industry. So the challenge is big, but I also think it's a great opportunity to make an impact by doing exactly what we are trying to do now with the fund, identify some of those technologies that will let us to reinvent ourselves in a carbon neutral way. Because, you know, steel is still the same steel. Doesn't matter if it's produced through blast furnace or in a carbon neutral way. And I can elaborate a little bit more on that as well. Because in a traditional way, you use coking coal, and that leads to the CO2 emissions. What we are trying now to do is to see if we can use initially natural gas to blow and produce directly reduced iron, and then eventually switch to hydrogen. I mean, we would switch to hydrogen tomorrow, of course. The challenge there is, first of all, the cost and, you know, the capital involved, and secondly, the actual infrastructure. How do you get hydrogen? How do you connect? So you really still need to create this whole hydrogen infrastructure. So we're talking about the lead time and significant investments. But then going back to your question about where we invest, so, you know, if you want to get to this carbon neutrality, there are a number of ways, including hydrogen, switching to green energy, renewable energy, circular economy. So all of those, it's not just one route, but I think it's a number of things that we are pursuing in order to efficiently get there. And on that journey, we do need to see what are the most optimal, efficient, and game-changing technologies that can help us accelerate that transition.
But would you see ArcelorMittal also in the long term still being a steel producer, or are you also trying to replace steel with other materials in certain applications?
I think steel is proven as, like I said, the material of choice, because it's a very versatile. I mean, it's an everyday material, and it's quite has a lot of qualities. You know, you can use it for infrastructure, for buildings, for cars, for wide appliances. So I don't see, I'm not excluding there will be some alternative materials, but as such, the history shows that, you know, this is a very durable and sustainable material. It's just how you produce it, that's the challenge. Can you produce it in a way that doesn't lead to such a significant carbon footprint, to such a significant level of CO2 emissions? And technologically, it is possible. It's just unlike some of you probably in software and high tech, and I think you are fortunate because if you come to, you know, if you identify a game-changing technology, I think it's like this, you can roll it out and it's you know, scaled globally. In the heavy industry like steel, it takes, you know, a number of billion and a number of years before you can actually get there once you identify it at a lab level.
Okay, thank you.
That's an interesting point, the ability to scale solutions. And I think that's one of the cruxes of the climate agenda is how we can work together to rapidly scale technologies that are actually already out there. And what's interesting is that as a brand new fund, we only started last year, we have a corporate that is completely incompetent at engaging in the startup community and knowing how to scale stuff. So one of the very first things to do is actually to build those appendages to the corporate, and that capability, those incentives, the mindset, the skills to be able to engage with very innovative new technologies or processes or methodologies so that the corporate then can digest it in a way that then makes the person who's taken the risk to do the initial digesting look like a hero, and then make sure that that solution then gets scaled globally. So what we've done is started, weirdly, is slightly back to front. We've started with the, you might call it the venture building approach. We call it CoLab. We're on CoLab 3. And CoLab 3 is about building up those partnerships and building up that desire to engage on the sustainability side of things. And with success stories and bagging those success stories, we then can launch a fund, because then you are then funding for scale, which makes just an enormous amount of sense. And then you can also get co-investment partners like you guys to come along and then make those solutions really globally scale. And in that world, of course, you've got to start where the corporate really has pain points. So basically, it's a monocrop culture business. We've got enormous hectares of land under tobacco. So now it's interesting. How do you manage biodiversity there? How do you really fundamentally change farming practices at a small, because a lot of the tobacco farmers are small farmers, they're not big. So how do you come out with a set of solutions, a set of metrics to measure, to monitor? So all of those appendages need to be in place, because there's no good solving something if you can't boast about the fact that you've moved it from A to B. And so we need those boast factors, because otherwise the corporate won't really want to do, and also those people won't get promoted and get adored inside corporate land. So it's quite an interesting place to play. Sometimes it's about creating the spaces inside the corporate where that innovation can thrive, and then be known to be there with the money bags, that if it's successful, money will come. And so the entrepreneurs find that mix quite exciting.
So let's get a little bit more specific. So, I mean, your fund is relatively new, so I'm not sure if you have already a success story to talk about. If not, what would be a success story for you? For when would you say, yeah, we really made an impact, right? I mean, we can, in corporates, and I have to say, including my corporate as well, we tend to talk about climate change and sustainability in relatively abstract terms. And we are a little shying away on making that specific. But I think if we are not going to the specifics, we will never change anything in the climate.
So we as a small fund, we've had a lovely success on the digitization of supply chain logistics with the Suez Canal. We had a really good, we implemented a data platform, which people were quite skeptical about, and then Suez happened, and it was absolutely fantastic, because in one day we were able to not only recover and avoided costs, the entire investment, but it was we were able to then, anyway, so we had a wonderful success story. I think up until that point, and luckily it happened really quickly, up until that point people were like, we're not really sure about this whole corporate venturing thing. So that was one of those wonderful moments where you're like, yes, we've showed real value to the corporate. On the sustainability side, it's a slower journey. So you've got to find the hook into the corporate so that it feels very personal. And interestingly, we have an industry issue with illicit tobacco. Illicit tobacco is farmed often in very environmentally vulnerable areas. So there's jungle slash and burn to plant the crop and things like that. And so interestingly, if you can get a handle on illicit tobacco planting crops, you can really solve some of the terrible farming practices that those. And so interesting, that's satellite technology. So we've become very, very knowledgeable now about satellite technology, and with the satellite technology, which is of course the nice sustainable angle, you can also really wonderfully manage water, your nitrogen fixation, you can manage your biodiversity, you can manage so many other things when you've got really good high definition pictures of areas. And so on the hook of one thing that everyone went yes about, we were able to land sort of 4 or 5 really, really good sustainability agendas. And it's amazing because with this transformation, if you think we started that just over a year ago, at the beginning of this year, we had a new, very vibrant, wonderful head of sustainability. And so when she came on, she was like, oh my God, you've got this. This is fantastic. So suddenly we've now got someone who wants to own that agenda and run with it. So hopefully, this time next year, we should have some really good success stories in that specific space.
Okay, Jim, we mentioned that, and next year we are then hearing the success story and the completion.
All will be welcome back.
Okay, hold on.
Irina.
Yes, I can also, I think I like that expression, hook into the corporate. The way we approach any investment is like most of you, I presume, through the strategic lens. Of course, when we write the check, we hope it's also going to yield incredible returns and it's going to be next unicorn. But the main angle is really how do we plug this in, or how do we translate it in our operations. I'll give a couple of examples. So one of the first investments we made is a concentrated solar power business. And simultaneously, we have signed an agreement to collaborate in a number of areas where we will use this energy for some of our sunny operations. And then the company will use the heat from the waste heat from the steelmaking operations in order for their process. And they will also use a certain application of steel to build the solar panels. So there are a number of areas to collaborate. So it's not just kind of, that's the company, it might be successful, we will support, we will invest. No, this is a potentially interesting company. Let's see how we can really plug it in our operations and how we can then scale and roll it out in other operations. Another investment I want to mention, because if we start looking at the renewable energy, the green energy, everyone's talking about now, switching to solar and switching to wind. We all know that the challenge and the issue around renewable energy is, the fact that the sun doesn't shine 24/7, the wind doesn't blow 24/7. So the company that we invested in, and I'm quite particularly excited about, is developing a long duration energy solution on the basis of directly reduced iron. So for us, it's of course music to our ears because that's exactly what we do. And so they're not going to use lithium and iron and nickel and some of those other battery materials like Tesla, etc. But it's really the low-cost iron that can lead to a much longer duration of storage, more than 100 hours, and can potentially solve this challenge with the renewable energy. So that's quite exciting.
Are you using the technology in ArcelorMittal already, maybe for the production of the hydrogen?
Well, what we are doing now, we are developing, so we're jointly developing the battery or the directly reduced iron to meet the specification of their chemistry. So this is now in the process of development, but we plan to supply the first steel or the first iron for the pilot early next year.
Okay, cool.
But on the hydrogen side, we do actually yesterday at COP, I was also at COP yesterday, we made an announcement, we're switching our Canadian operations to DRI, so directly reduced iron using hydrogen. And we, in fact, made 3 announcements in the last couple of months, whereby we will switch the Spanish operation. So our operations in Spain will be producing directly reduced iron using hydrogen, as well as our Belgium operations, where we signed the MOU with the Belgium government as well. So we're trying to make sure that we really front-run the decarbonization of the steel industry and planning to invest at least what we publicly announced, 10 billion in the next couple of years in some of those initiatives.
Exciting, super. Tobias.
Nice. So at Hitachi Ventures, we actually institutionalized the collaboration piece. There is a so-called CVO corporate venture office based in Tokyo. It's seven members, and they do a tremendous job in actually connecting startups and our portfolio compass to wider Hitachi. So in general, in terms of success, I think there's about 30 companies that are already kind of working with Hitachi and kind of bring their technologies into the large corporation in various business units. But if we kind of zoom in on environmental tech, we've just recently invested in a battery recycling company. But to be more precise, it's a kind of battery materials company that is not kind of purely getting the raw earth materials back and putting it back into the supply chain. They create right directly out of the battery and manufacturing scrap, they produce active material, being the cathode and the anode. And this process leads to a much higher ROI, or actually makes battery recycling very profitable. And on the other hand, it's a very sustainable process. So kind of we really think with that investment, we can transform the battery recycling and the battery production supply chain and do good. But simultaneously, Hitachi is working on an ecosystem and kind of ecosystem of partners and solutions along the electromobility value chain. And the core strive and strategy is to help Hitachi's customer the transition to electric mobility. And for that, you have to understand the complete ecosystem. You have to be able to develop solutions from cradle to cradle, and the end of life of batteries is just a very crucial part. And with our investment, we kind of add to the wider ecosystem and the solution kind of portfolio that Hitachi is then able to deliver to its customers.
So it's exciting times. So a lot is happening. I think you gave us a perfect sense of that, and I would say finally a lot is happening. I think we waited way too long in order to really take action. How do you measure success in your company? So is it, I mean, you know, when we hear the venturing world, it's about the financial gains on the investments. When we hear about climate-focused investment, then it should be also about the carbon reduction. So how do you balance these KPIs?
Well, I think for us, it's of course, again, like you correctly said, it's climate-focused investment. So we want to reduce CO2. So the carbon reduction would definitely be the key metrics. Mm-hmm. I mean, carbon emissions reduction would definitely be the key metrics. But of course, you also want to couple it with the financial success. You don't want just to waste or throw money. And of course, we all know that this needs to happen. Lots of investments are required. I'm going to mention one aspect that Bill Gates always mentions in his book. I'm sure some of you read How to Avoid the Climate Disaster, when he talks about green premium. And green premium is really this difference between the fossil equivalent and the green equivalent. And in some cases, the green premium is quite high. So who's gonna really pay for this? How are we gonna bridge this gap? So if you look now at the way the steel is produced, and if you look at the cost of a green steel, is it something that's going to be passed on the consumer? Is it something that the government's going to subsidize? Is it something that the corporate will pay? And I think the answer there will be, and I know maybe I'm deviating slightly from the measurement question, but I think the answer there is really around collaboration, but then you do want to measure it also on the financial metrics as well.
But when you talk about CO2 reduction, is it the CO2 reduction caused by your portfolio companies somewhere, or really CO2 reduction at ArcelorMittal by your portfolio companies?
Well, I personally want to look at it broader, not just within the company, but for the steel industry as such. So I do hope, and I'm coming from M&A initially, and this is the area where you always, everything is super confidential and super sensitive and secretive. I think this is where we need to share. I think, if you do identify a certain way, I think everyone should benefit. I think the world should benefit from this sharing practice. You don't want to just keep it close to your heart and say, oh, yes, I got it, but I'm not going to show it to everyone. I'm only at ArcelorMittal going to be producing green steel, but, I don't think that's the way. I think the way is, the moment we find the way, and there are ways, technologically there are ways, it's just more how do you accelerate it, how do you make it as efficient, as quick, as fast, how do you reduce the emissions and really reach those ambitious targets we set, and how do you make sure that others follow, and really also, so, together we make the most meaningful impact.
Mm-hmm. How's it for you, Tobias? How get you measured?
I put it in different kind of phases. When we decide on an investment, we make sure that once the technology in the company scales is doing substantially good and not kind of harm even when they scale, because that's kind of can be a concern with some of the technologies. So in that sense, that's a selection criteria. But then when we measure, obviously financial return is a very good practice, or financial metrics is a very good proxy of, did we select the right company? Does that company scale and actually, by being successful, create that impact? That's kind of this one measure. And the other is obviously kind of internal success. That we connect the companies with Hitachi businesses. We want to be helpful to the portfolio company and vice versa. So the inspiration and acceleration of the respective businesses, and we track that also internally. How successful are we in initiating these collaborations, and how do these collaborations impact the business being initiate something new? And it's hard to generalize or really have a bottom line impact, because it's a technology or it's a solution that you can directly sell to customers. Then you can measure it also with the financial success, but that's kind of case by case. But both metrics are equally important.
I think finance is just the hygiene, right? If you don't get hygiene finance right, you're not in business very quickly. So I think that just has to be there. Otherwise, you're just operating on quite a short-term mentality. I think the important thing here is that it shouldn't be sustainability metrics for sustainability businesses. I think that thinking needs to just disappear. That's the thinking of 10 years ago. COP26, it really does feel like people have finally woken up that there is a massive climate emergency. And so therefore you can't bucket climate measuring just to businesses that are doing something about the climate. No. Climate measuring now needs to be for everybody, for every single flipping business out there, right? It's not acceptable if you're investing in a packaging business that packaging doesn't have a proper sustainable lifetime management around it. Right? How is it going to be collected? How is it recycled? What is the cradle-to-grave benefits of that technology? If you're doing a consumer product, tell us how you're managing the product. How is it being produced? Are you making sure that it's being produced with as much green energy as possible? How are you managing water? How are you managing? All of these metrics just need to be normal, and they need to be baked into every single investment. If we don't do that, then all we're doing is investing in bloody nightmares that are going to cause us problems in the next 10 years when they scale up. Why would we choose to scale rubbish, climate-poor solutions? So I just want to, for me, it's very much passionate. We've got to bake in metrics around everything that we do. This planet needs a bit of fixing, and we collectively, as we heard last night, we have the power to do that. And if by just changing a few little simple metrics with your portfolio companies, and by the way, throw in some diversity metrics while we're at it, because we might as well fix that at the same time, because that would be quite nice. Let's put some good metrics out there, and let's use our little farmyard of companies that we're busy growing. Let's grow up decent companies that we'll be proud of knowing, and that our kids will be proud to interact in the next 10, 20 years.
Maybe just to add to this, I think it's not the planet and that needs to be fixed, and it's actually our ways. It's us, how we produce things. I think that needs to be so. Yeah. But I fully agree with this. The climate objective needs to fully integrate in the way we need to reinvent the way we, and it just comes, to everyday business, to each other kind of personal approach to things, right? It starts with each one of us, but of course, how we produce things, how we consume things, and the energies is absolutely critical.
Yeah, I think the root cause is always us. It's our companies. How we produce things, and as a consumer, we always have impact. We can vote with our feet what we are consuming, what we are not consuming, and if we always go after the cheapest solution, it's probably not the most climate neutral solution. So in order to wrap it up, call for action. So, Lisa.
I think my one message is it's all about scale up, and for scale up we have to work together. It requires collaboration. So if someone out there has an awesome solution. Just make sure we all know about it so that we can be part of that solution and taking it global.
I'd like to build on that, and I think it's not the collaborations between the corporates or the collaborations between the funds. I think all the stakeholders need to come together. It should be the policymakers. I know lots of them are now at COP. We do hope that they will come up with some radical measures, because it's really radical measures that are required pretty much yesterday, because Paula, you were asking when. I said, you know, it's really now, because, you know, we're already quite late. And so it's collaboration between consumers, between the producers, between the, like I said, policymakers. So it's all forces have to come together to make it, you know, really sustainable in the most efficient way. And I think corporate venture capital has a critical role to play in there, as we are also encouraging the innovative ecosystem to play a huge role in really making sure that some of those promising technologies get to scale, you know, this journey from the lab to the industrial scale is optimized, and we can quickly scale up the solutions.
Tobias, your call for
Got it.
action?
I think we're in complete alignment. I think this kind of act together and act now is the key. So I don't want to repeat. I want to kind of emphasize actually that kind of, especially we as corporates, if we also combine our investing power, if we can create winners in the market, because we have the access to the customers, we have the money, kind of we can really scale and make these impact. And for that, I think kind of we're kind of all open to invest substantial time and money and kind of really build great companies out of that.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you.